Hello everyone, today Biker with a Heart bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. We hope you enjoy listening.
The desert wind howled like a forgotten ghost across the cracked asphalt of Route 17, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and regret. It was just past midnight when Elena Ramirez pulled her battered pickup to the side of the road, her hands trembling on the wheel. The call had come from the sheriff's office earlier that evening, another false lead on her husband Marco, who had vanished 3 years ago during a routine supply run for his construction crew. But this time, it wasn't just a dead end, it was a gut punch. They'd found his truck, abandoned in a ravine 50 miles out, riddled with bullet holes that whispered of something far worse than an accident. Elena's world, already frayed at the edges, unraveled completely as she stared at the empty horizon. The weight of her wedding ring, a simple silver band etched with their initials, burning against her finger like a promise she could no longer bear. Tears blurred the stars above, and in that moment of raw vulnerability, headlights pierced the darkness like accusatory eyes. A lone motorcycle roared into view, its engine a thunderous growl that drowned out her sobs. The rider, a weathered man in his late 40s with a salt and pepper beard and scars, mapping his knuckles like old road maps, slowed to a stop beside her truck. He killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the creak of his leather jacket as he dismounted. Elena froze, her heart pounding. Strangers on this stretch of highway were rarely benevolent. But there was no menace in his approach. His eyes, shadowed under the brim of a faded ball cap, held a quiet recognition, as if he'd seen this scene played out 100 times before. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly from years of wind and whispers, "you look like you've been carrying the weight of the world. Need a hand, or just someone to listen?" Elena wiped her face, glancing at the badge on his vest. Iron Vow MC. The patches faded but proud. She'd heard stories of biker crews like his, guardians of the forgotten roads, but trust came hard after Marco's disappearance. Still, something in his steady gaze cracked her defenses. She nodded, stepping out into the chill night air, the gravel crunching under her boots like brittle bones. They talked under the indifferent moon, her words spilling out in fragments. Marco's laugh that could light up a room, the way he'd promised to build her a home with a view of the mountains, the endless nights she'd spent staring at his empty side of the bed. The biker, calling himself Jax Harlan, listened without interruption, his calloused hands folded in his lap as he sat on his bike. When she finished, a heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. Jax reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, the edges curled from time. It showed a group of men in military fatigues, young and unbreakable, arms slung around each other in a desert outpost half a world away. Marco was there, grinning in the center, his arm around a younger Jax. "He was my brother in arms," Jax said softly, the words carrying the weight of oaths sworn under fire. "We made a pact back then, watch each other's backs no matter what. I lost touch after he got out, built that life with you. But when I heard, I couldn't stay away." Elena's breath caught, the ring on her finger suddenly feeling like a lifeline rather than a chain. Jax's eyes met hers, searching. "Do you still wear it?" His ring. She nodded, holding up her hand, the silver catching the moonlight. In that simple gesture, a spark ignited, a promise not just between her and Marco, but one that Jax was willing to honor, pulling her into a web of loyalty that stretched across years and miles. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and gold, Jax fired up his engine again. "I'm not leaving you to chase shadows alone," he vowed, the rumble vibrating through the air like a heartbeat. "The Iron Vow doesn't forget its own. We'll find out what happened to him, together." Elena watched him ride off toward the rising sun, a convoy of dust trailing in his wake, her resolve hardening like steel in the forge. For the first time in years, hope flickered, fragile but fierce. Born from the unyielding bond of men who kept their word, the morning light filtered through the blinds of Elena's modest home on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a town where secrets festered like untreated wounds. She paced the kitchen, the linoleum cool under her bare feet, replaying Jax's words. Marco had never spoken much of his army days, only that they'd left scars deeper than any bullet. But now, with the photo tucked safely in her pocket, pieces began to align. The sheriff had dismissed the truck's condition as a hit-and-run, but Jax's grim expression suggested otherwise. Corruption, perhaps, or old enemies resurfacing like ghosts from the sand. By noon, Eleanor found herself at the local diner, the air thick with the aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. She nursed a mug, her mind racing, when the door swung open with a jingle. Jax entered, flanked by two other bikers, a burly woman named Riley with a tattoo of a phoenix rising from chains on her forearm, and a quiet veteran called Thomas, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. They slid into the booth across from her, their presence drawing wary glances from the locals. "We ride as a family," Riley said, her voice steady. "Marco was one of us, even if he hung up his colors. What's our first move?" Elena hesitated, the weight of their loyalty pressing against her isolation. She pulled out a crumpled map from Marco's old toolbox, marked with routes he'd taken that fateful day. He was delivering materials to a site near Blackridge Pass, said it was just a job, but he came home jumpy that week. Jax nodded, tracing the line with a scarred finger. "That pass is cartel territory now, smugglers using the old mines. If he saw something—" The implication hung heavy, a shadow over the checkered tablecloth. As the afternoon waned, they mapped a plan under the diner's fluorescent hum, scout the ravine, talk to off-the-books contacts, unearth whatever the sheriff's office had buried. Elena felt a surge of purpose, the ring on her finger no longer a relic, but a beacon. Driving back with Jax's crew in tow, their bikes flanking her truck like iron sentinels, she glimpsed the horizon, not as an end, but as a path forward. The desert whispered secrets, and for the first time she was ready to listen. Twilight settled like a velvet shroud over Willow Creek as Elena stood on her porch, the screen door creaking in the breeze. Jax lingered by his bike, polishing the chrome with a rag that smelled of oil and memory. "This road we're on, it's not paved with easy answers," he said, his voice low, "but promises like ours, they outlast the storms." She met his gaze, the shared grief forging an unspoken alliance. In the gathering dusk, with the first stars pricking the sky, Elena realized that moving on didn't mean letting go. It meant fighting for the truth, surrounded by a chosen family willing to ride into the unknown. The engine's roar faded into the night as Jax departed, leaving Eleanor with a burner phone and a vow etched in her soul. Tomorrow, they'd ride to Blackridge, chasing echoes of a man who had never truly left her side. The ring gleamed faintly, a silent testament to love's enduring fire. The sun clawed its way over the jagged peaks of Blackridge Pass as Elena gripped the wheel of her truck, the engine humming with a tension that mirrored her own. Dust devils danced across the barren landscape, swirling like restless spirits, while the scent of sun-baked earth and distant pine invaded the cab through the cracked window. Jax rode ahead on his Harley, a black silhouette cutting through the haze, with Riley and Thomas flanking him like shadows forged in loyalty. The burner phone buzzed in Elena's pocket, a simple reminder that she wasn't alone anymore, that the Iron Vows code extended to her, a widow tethered to a ghost. They arrived at the ravine by mid-morning, the air thick with the metallic tang of exposed rock and something sharper, like old blood long faded. Elena's boots crunched on the loose gravel as she dismounted, her heart pounding in rhythm with the fading echoes of their bikes. The site where Marco's truck had been found was cordoned off, with weathered tape that fluttered like surrender flags in the wind. Bullet holes scarred the twisted metal frame, now half buried in the dirt, a silent accusation against the official story of a tragic accident. Jax knelt beside it, his gloved hand tracing the dents without touching, his face etched with the quiet fury of a man who'd buried too many brothers. "Looks like they tried to make it clean," Riley muttered, her voice a low rumble as she scanned the perimeter, her phoenix tattoo seeming to flicker in the sunlight. But amateurs leave traces. Marco wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Tomas nodded silently, his hawk-like eyes picking out scuff marks in the soil, footprints too deliberate for scavengers, boot treads that spoke of hurried cover-up. Elena felt a chill despite the rising heat, her fingers brushing the silver ring as if drawing strength from its cool weight. Marco had worn its match until the day he vanished, promising over late-night coffee that nothing would break them. Now, those words felt like a map to this forsaken place. They spread out, methodically combing the area under the relentless sun. Jax pulled Elena aside to a cluster of boulders overlooking the drop, where the wind carried faint whispers from the mines below. Abandoned shafts that locals swore were haunted by more than echoes. "He mentioned something once, back in the service," Jax said, his gravelly tone softened by memory. "A debt from the war, not money, honor. We ran ops in places like this, guarding convoys that carried more than supplies. If the cartels got wind of old ties—" He trailed off, his scarred knuckles whitening as he clenched a fist. Elena's throat tightened. Marco had come home changed after his tour, his laughter rarer, his silences deeper. She chalked it up to the invisible wounds of combat, but now it gnawed at her. Had he been running from shadows she'd never seen? A shout from Thomas broke the moment. He'd found a scrap of fabric snagged on a thorn bush, faded blue denim matching the jeans Marco favored, stained with what could have been rust or worse. Riley bagged it carefully in a makeshift evidence pouch, her expression hardening. This isn't random. Someone dragged him off that road, and the sheriff's playing blind. Elena's mind raced to the man in uniform who delivered the news 3 years ago, his eyes avoiding hers, his report too neat. Corruption in Willow Creek wasn't rumor. It was the undercurrent that poisoned the well, turning guardians into gatekeepers for the wrong side. As noon approached, the heat mirage shimmered like a veil over the pass, distorting the horizon. They retreated to a shaded overhang, sharing water from canteens that tasted of plastic and perseverance. Jax unfolded an old tactical map, yellowed at the edges, marking potential cartel hideouts in the mines. "We go in quiet," he instructed, his voice steady as rebar. "No guns blazing, that's their game. We uncover the truth, expose it, for Marco, for the promise." Elena nodded, but doubt flickered in her chest like a dying ember. What if the truth demanded more than words? What if it forced her to confront the life she'd built in Marco's absence? Nights alone with their daughter, Sophia, now 7, and asking fewer questions about Daddy's long trip. Sophia. The thought hit Elena like a dust storm, pulling her back to the present. She'd left the girl with a neighbor, promising a quick return, but this ride was unraveling into something endless. "I can't lose more time," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jax placed a hand on her shoulder, the leather of his jacket warm from the sun. "Family's what we fight for, Eleanor. Blood or chosen, it doesn't matter. Marco knew that. It's why he wore the ring, why he came home to you." His words wrapped around her like the convoy's formation, a shield against the isolation that had defined her grief. They pressed on into the afternoon, descending a narrow trail toward the mine entrances. The air grew cooler, laced with the musty breath of the earth, and shadows lengthened like fingers reaching for secrets. Thomas spotted fresh tire tracks veering off the main path, leading to a concealed shaft boarded up with fresh planks. Riley tested the wood, solid but not impenetrable. "Voices!" she hissed, pressing her ear to a crack. Faint murmurs drifted out, laced with urgency, words in Spanish too muffled to decipher but heavy with intent. Elena's pulse thundered as Jack signaled for caution. They huddled, debating in whispers. Breach now or call in reinforcements from the club. The moral weight pressed down. Justice demanded action, but recklessness could bury them all. In that suspended moment, Eleanor felt Marco's presence, not as a spectre, but as a guide urging her forward. The ring burned against her skin, a reminder that promises weren't kept in safety. They were forged in the fire of choice. As the sun dipped lower, casting the ravine in amber glow, they decided on subtlety. A lookout, while Jax and Tomas pried at the boards. Splinters flew like accusations, and for a heartbeat silence reigned. Then a low groan echoed from within, not mechanical but human, pain or warning. It was impossible to tell. Elena's breath caught, the world narrowing to that sound, pulling her deeper into the web of loyalty and loss. Whatever lay beyond, it was the first thread unraveling the lie, and she was ready to pull, ring and all, into the unknown. The groan from the mine shaft reverberated like a fracture in the earth's brittle skin, pulling the group into a taut silence broken only by the distant caw of a raven circling overhead. Dust motes danced in the slanting rays of the late afternoon sun, casting elongated shadows that clawed at the rocky ground. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the uncertainty that had shadowed her life since Marco's ring had become a solitary anchor. Jax froze mid-motion, his pry bar hovering like a suspended judgment, while Riley's hand instinctively went to the knife at her belt, not for violence, but for the quiet resolve of those who'd learned to protect what mattered. "Easy," Jax whispered, his gravelly voice a steady anchor in the thickening tension. The air inside the shaft carried a stale chill, mingled with the faint, acrid bite of unwashed fear and something metallic, like forgotten tools left to rust. Thomas eased the board aside with deliberate care, the wood protesting in a low creak that seemed to amplify in the confined space. They peered into the gloom, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness, revealing a narrow tunnel lined with timbers scarred by time and neglect. The groan came again. Weaker now, from deeper within, a human plea swallowed by the stone. Elena stepped forward, her boots scraping softly on the gravel-strewn floor, the silver ring catching a glint from Thomas's light. It felt heavier now, not just a memento, but a compass pointing toward truths she'd long buried under layers of routine and quiet despair. "Marco," she called out, her voice barely above a hush, laced with a hope she hadn't dared voice since that midnight breakdown on Route 17. No answer came, only the drip of water echoing like hesitant tears from some unseen crevice. Riley placed a firm hand on Elena's arm, her phoenix tattoo a vivid reminder of rebirth amid chains. "We move as one," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "No rushing into the dark alone. That's how promises break." They advanced single file, the tunnel narrowing like a vein pulsing with secrets. The walls pressed in, rough-hewn rock brushing against their shoulders, releasing puffs of dust that clung to their clothes like unspoken regrets. Jax led, his broad frame a shield, the faint jingle of keys on his belt marking their progress like a metronome of fate. Memories flickered in Elena's mind. Marco's stories of desert nights during his service huddled in similar confines, sharing oaths with men like Jax under the indifferent stars. Those bonds had outlasted deployments and discharges, weaving a tapestry of loyalty that now enveloped her, an outsider no more. A faint light flickered ahead, not natural but artificial, spilling from a side chamber where crates loomed like silent sentinels. They halted, breaths held, as voices murmured in the dimness, harsh tones in Spanish, clipped with urgency. Words like entrega and problema drifted out, painting pictures of illicit exchanges hidden in the earth's bowels. Elena's stomach twisted. This wasn't mere smuggling. The cartels had sunk their roots here, twisting the land Marco had loved into a labyrinth of moral decay. Jack signaled a retreat, but Thomas's sharp intake of breath stopped them cold. In the beam of his light, a figure slumped against the wall, bound at the wrists with coarse rope, clothes torn and dirt-streaked, but alive. It wasn't Marco. The man was younger, perhaps in his 30s, with a face swollen from signs of rough handling, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and guarded relief. "Help!" he rasped, his voice cracking like dry earth underfoot. "They took my partner. Said he'd talk if I didn't." Elena knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she worked at the knots, the rope biting into her palms like the barbs of delayed justice. "Who are they?" Jax demanded softly, his presence a wall against the encroaching shadows. The man, introducing himself as Luis, a local hauler caught in the wrong delivery, glanced nervously toward the chamber. "Cartel runners, your friend. The one from 3 years back. He stumbled on their cash. They made an example." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through Elena's core. Marco hadn't vanished by accident. He'd crossed a line drawn in the sand by men who profited from corruption, their influence seeping into Willow Creek's underbelly, like poison in the water table. Luis's story unfolded in fragmented whispers. Marco had been hauled here, questioned harshly, then moved to a deeper holdout when he refused to break. "He mentioned a ring," Luis added, his gaze flicking to Elena's hand. "Said it was his promise to a woman, to come home, kept muttering it even when they—" He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy, a veil over the scars of endurance. Riley helped Luis to his feet, supporting his weight as they backed toward the entrance, the tunnel's chill now laced with the urgency of escape. Outside, the sun hung low, bathing the ravine in a golden haze that belied the darkness they'd unearthed. Jax radioed the club on a secure line, his voice low and resolute. "We've got a lead. Send the convoy. Discreet. This ends with truth, not blood." Elena leaned against a boulder, the cool stone grounding her as waves of emotion crashed, grief for the man who'd carried their shared vow through hell, anger at the system that had turned a blind eye, and a fierce gratitude for this chosen kin who'd awakened her from stasis. As the first stars pierced the twilight sky, the distant rumble of approaching bikes vibrated through the ground, a symphony of solidarity. Luis slumped in Elena's truck, safe for now, but his words echoed in her mind, Marco's unyielding spirit, clinging to that ring like a talisman. She twisted hers on her finger, feeling its etched initials pulse with renewed purpose. The sheriff's neat report, the abandoned truck, it all unraveled like a poorly tied knot, exposing threads of institutional rot that demanded exposure. But justice here wasn't a gavel strike. It was the quiet power of witnesses, of promises fulfilled in the face of cynicism. Night fell fully as the Iron Vow riders arrived, their headlights slicing the darkness like beacons of moral fire. Jax briefed them under the cover of boulders, maps spread on the truck's hood, the scent of cooling engines mingling with the night's sage-scented breath. Elena stood at the edge, watching the group coalesce. Veterans, wanderers, all bound by codes older than the mountains. Tomas sketched a route to the deeper mines, his hawk eyes mapping risks with precision born of past battles. Riley handed Elena a club patch, a simple Iron Vow emblem. "You're one of us now," she said simply. "For him, for you." In that moment, amid the low hum of strategy and the vast, starlit expanse, Elena felt the weight lift, not entirely, but enough to breathe. Marco's absence was a wound, but the path to healing lay in this ride, in honoring the honor he'd embodied. The groan from the mine had been a call, and they were answering, not with vengeance, but with the unbreaking loyalty that turned strangers into saviors. As the convoy formed, engines purring like awakened guardians, Elena climbed into her truck, the ring a steady glow on her dashboard. The road ahead twisted into uncertainty, but for the first time she rode not alone, but toward redemption's horizon. The moon hung like a tarnished silver coin over Blackridge Pass, casting a pale luminescence that turned the ravine into a monochrome canvas of jagged edges and whispering winds. Eleanor sat on the tailgate of her truck, the metal still warm from the day's relentless sun, her fingers tracing the faint etchings on her wedding ring as if decoding a cipher long overlooked. The Iron Vow convoy had swelled to a dozen riders now, their bikes lined up like silent sentinels under the star-pricked sky, engines cooling with soft ticks that punctuated the night's hush. Jax moved among them, his silhouette broad and unyielding, briefing the newcomers in murmurs that carried the gravity of battlefield councils, names like Reyes and Harlan, bonds forged not in blood but in the crucible of shared oaths. Luis, bandaged and propped against a crate in the truck bed, sipped water from a canteen, his face a map of exhaustion etched deeper than the mind's veins. "They moved him 2 days ago," he said, his voice a ragged thread weaving through the group's quiet resolve. "Deeper into the old shafts, where the cartel stashes what can't see daylight. Guards, 3, maybe 4. They talk about shipments crossing the border, but your man, he knows too much about their roots from back in the day." Elena's breath caught, the words painting vivid strokes of Marco's defiance. Not a victim crumbling under pressure, but a soldier holding the line, his promise to her a shield against the darkness. The ring on her finger seemed to hum with his presence, a tactile echo of late-night vows whispered in their Willow Creek kitchen. Before the construction jobs pulled him into the shadows of the pass, Riley crouched nearby, her phoenix tattoo glowing faintly in the moonlight as she cleaned her knife with methodical care, the blade catching glints like fleeting hopes. "We don't storm in like fools," she said, her tone laced with the wisdom of scars earned in forgotten skirmishes. "This is about pulling the truth into the light, exposing the rot that's let them thrive while folks like us bury our dead." Tomas nodded from his perch on a boulder, his hawk eyes scanning the horizon for any unnatural flicker, the wind tugging at his jacket like an impatient ghost. The group's moral compass spun true here, in this forsaken stretch. Justice not as a blunt instrument, but as the slow, inexorable reveal of corruption's underbelly, where sheriffs turned blind eyes for envelopes thick with tainted cash, and old war debts twisted into chains. Jax approached Elena, his boots crunching gravel like subdued thunder, and extended a hand to help her down. "You holding?" he asked, his gravelly voice softened by the night's intimacy, eyes reflecting the same unquenched fire that had drawn him back to these roads. She nodded, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her certainty. Sophia's face flashed in her mind, the girl's trusting smile, a beacon pulling her homeward even as this quest anchored her here. "What if he's changed?" she whispered, the fear slipping out like steam from a cooling engine. Jax's scarred hand closed over hers, the warmth of his grip a bridge across the chasm of her isolation. "Promises like yours don't bend, Elena. They hold, even when everything else crumbles. Marco's waiting, clinging to that ring like we are to this vow." Dawn's first blush crept over the peaks as they mobilized, the convoy splitting into flanks, a diversion team to draw any perimeter watch, while Jax, Riley, Thomas and Elena slipped toward the concealed entrance. The air grew heavier with the scent of damp stone and pine resin as they descended the trail, flashlights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the pre-light gloom. Elena's pulse synced with the rhythm of their steps, each one a step deeper into the ethical labyrinth, confronting not just captors, but the institutional betrayal that had orphaned her grief. Whispers of cartel influence in Willow Creek echoed in her thoughts. The sheriff's evasive reports, the construction bids mysteriously awarded to silent partners, Marco's unease in those final weeks now reframed as a warning she'd missed. The shaft loomed ahead, its mouth a yawning void framed by splintered boards they'd pried earlier, the interior exhaling a breath of mildew and muffled echoes. They entered with the precision of a ritual, ropes uncoiling like lifelines to the surface world. The tunnel sloped downward, walls slick with condensation that beaded like unshed tears, amplifying every scuff and breath into a symphony of suspense. Jax led, his frame blocking the narrow path, while Riley covered their rear, her presence a steady counterpoint to the encroaching dark. Elena felt the weight of the chosen family around her, strangers who'd become kin through Jax's pact, their loyalty a counterforce to the cynicism that had hollowed her out. Voices filtered through the stone ahead, sharper now, laced with agitation. Arguments over delayed shipments, a name dropped that twisted Elena's gut, Rios, a shadowy figure rumored to pull strings from Willow Creek's town hall. They pressed on, navigating a fork where the air turned fouler, laced with the tang of sweat and desperation. Thomas signaled a halt at a reinforced door, its metal door scarred by hasty welds, faint light seeping from beneath. A low murmur emanated from within, not threats, but a solitary voice, reciting something rhythmic like a mantra against oblivion. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp as recognition dawned. It was Marco's cadence, the one he'd used to soothe Sophia during thunderstorms, a habit from his army days to steady fraying nerves. "It's him," she breathed, tears blurring her vision, the ring on her finger a burning talisman. Jax's eyes met hers, a silent affirmation of the promise bridging their worlds. But Riley's grip tightened on her arm. Guards patrolled nearby, their shadows flickering like moral pitfalls. The dilemma crystallized: burst in and risk chaos, or lure them out, turning the captor's arrogance into their undoing. In the suspended heartbeat, Jax weighed the scales, his face a canvas of quiet torment, the veteran's code clashing with the father's instinct to protect what remained. Truth first, he decided, voice a low rumble. We free him whole, not in pieces. They retreated a pace, Thomas rigging a subtle distraction, a rock cascade triggered by a tripline, echoing like a cave-in to pull the guards away. The plan unfolded with taut precision, the group's unity a testament to redemption's quiet power, honor not in spectacle, but in the deliberate choice to preserve life amid corruption's grasp. As the echoes faded, they breached the door, hinges groaning like confessions. Inside, in a chamber lit by a single swaying bulb, Marco huddled in the corner, chains loose around his ankles, his frame gaunt, but eyes alight with unbowed fire. He looked up, the match to Elena's ring glinting on his chained hand, and in that gaze, 3 years of absence dissolved into a single unbreakable vow. If this story of enduring love and loyalty is resonating with you, please hit that like button below. It helps spread these tales of hope far and wide. The chamber's air hung thick and stagnant, a cocktail of damp stone, rust, and the faint acrid tang of unwashed desperation that clawed at Elena's throat. The single bulb swung lazily overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced across Marco's face like fleeting memories refusing to settle. His eyes, once bright with the easy humor that had won her heart in a dusty Willow Creek bar, now burned with a fierce, unyielding clarity, scarred by time but unbroken. Chains rattled softly as he shifted, the links loose enough to suggest neglect rather than restraint, as if his captors had long since realized that will alone could bind a man like him. Elena's world narrowed to that glint on his finger, the twin to her own ring, its silver etched with their initials catching the light like a beacon through fog. "Marco," she whispered, the name a prayer and a wound, her voice fracturing in the confined space. She rushed forward, knees hitting the gritty floor, her hands trembling as they cupped his face, tracing the hollows of cheeks she'd last seen full of life 3 years prior. He leaned into her touch, a ghost of a smile cracking his lips, parched and split from the desert's unforgiving kiss. "Elena, you came." His words were hoarse, scraped raw by silence and solitude, but they carried the weight of every unspoken promise. Every night she'd lain awake, clutching his pillow. Jax hovered at the threshold, his broad frame blocking the doorway like a vigilant oak, while Riley and Thomas scanned the shadows, their flashlights slicing through the gloom for any sign of interruption. The reunion unfolded in fragments, time suspending in the sway of the bulb, Marco's arms wrapping around her with a strength born of survival, the scent of earth and sweat mingling with the faint trace of his cologne she'd long thought faded. "I held on to this," he murmured, lifting his chained hand to brush her ring with his thumb, the metal singing softly against metal. "Told myself it was my way home. They tried to break me, lies about shipments, old routes from the war, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction, not when I had you waiting." Tears carved clean paths down Elena's dust-streaked cheeks, the emotional dam she'd built crumbling under the flood of relief and rage. This wasn't just rescue, it was redemption, a vow pulled from the brink, honoring the quiet honor that had defined their life together, but the moment shattered like fragile glass under boot heel. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel beyond, harsh, purposeful, accompanied by the low mutter of voices in Spanish, laced with alarm. Riley's knife hand tensed, her phoenix tattoo seeming to flare in the dim light. "Guards! 2! Closing fast!" she hissed, positioning herself at the door's flank. Jax moved with the fluid grace of a man who danced with danger in far-off sands, uncoiling a length of rope from his pack to reinforce Marco's bonds, just enough to feign captivity if needed. Tomas doused the flashlights, plunging the chamber into a murky half-light where outlines blurred and hearts raced in unison. Eleanor helped Marco to his feet, his weight leaning on her like an anchor rediscovered, his breath ragged against her ear. "The sheriff." "He's in it deep," Marco rasped, urgency sharpening his gaze. "Took bribes to look away, buried reports. I saw the truck rigged, meant to look like an accident after I overheard their plans at the site. Cartel money flows through Willow Creek like water under the bridge." The revelation hit Elena like a dust storm, stirring the embers of her doubt into a blaze. The man who'd knocked on her door with condolences, his badge gleaming falsely, now stood exposed as the architect of her isolation, a pillar of authority corrupted, trading justice for shadows. The guards burst into view, silhouettes hulking in the tunnel's mouth, their faces twisted in confusion, turning to fury as they spotted the intruders. "Que carajo!" one barked, reaching for a holstered sidearm, the metallic click echoing like a verdict. Jax stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of parley, his voice steady as rebar. "We're not here for blood. We're here for the truth about the man you held, about the rot you've let fester." The lead guard sneered, his eyes flicking to Marco with contempt, but Riley's presence at his side, a woman unyielding as forged steel, halted his draw. Thomas flanked the other, a silent threat in his hawk-like poise, the air crackling with the ethical standoff, force against fidelity, greed against the unbreakable code of the Iron Vow. Words flew like sparks, accusations of interference, threats veiled in bravado, but Jax held the line, his gravelly tone weaving a moral snare. "You think chains hold men like us? We've got witnesses now. Luis outside. Marco's story. The sheriff's game ends when we ride back with proof." The guards hesitated, the weight of exposure pressing like the tunnel's ceiling, their corruption a fragile empire built on silence. Elena clutched Marco closer, his ring pressing into her palm, a tactile vow that this confrontation wasn't vengeance, but vindication, the poetic justice of loyalty outlasting deceit. In a blur of motion, Thomas disarmed the nearer guard with a precise sweep, the weapon clattering into the shadows, while Riley pinned the other against the wall, her knife a whisper at his throat, not to harm, but to underscore the choice. Stand down or face the light of truth. The struggle was brief, contained, a testament to the group's restraint. No shots fired, no blows landing in cruelty, only the quiet power of integrity prevailing. Marco, freed from his loose chains by Elena's steady hands, stood tall despite his frailty, his voice joining the fray. Tell your boss, the promises we made outlast your payoffs. Honor doesn't bend. As the guards slumped in submission, zip-tied with their own ropes, the group retreated up the tunnel, the air lightening with each step toward the surface. Dawn's full light greeted them like a benediction, painting the ravine in warm golds that chased away the night's chill. The convoy waited, engines idling like patient guardians, their headlights a constellation of support. Elena guided Marco into the truck, his head resting on her shoulder, the rings on their fingers intertwined, a symbol of reunion forged in the fire of perseverance. Jax mounted his bike, the roar of the group a thunderous affirmation as they formed up, dust swirling in their wake. But the road back to Willow Creek wasn't clear yet. Marco's warnings lingered. The sheriff's web extended further, tendrils into town hall and beyond, demanding a reckoning that would test their chosen family's resolve. Eleanor glanced at Jax through the rear view, his nod a silent pact. Redemption wasn't claimed in isolation, but shared, a legacy of sacrifice and unyielding honor. As the pass receded, the desert wind carried whispers of change, the first cracks in corruption's facade, pulling them toward a horizon where promises, once lost, shone eternal. The tires of Elena's truck hummed over the cracked asphalt of Route 17, the desert sun climbing higher to bake the horizon into a shimmering veil of gold and haze. Marco sat beside her, his gaunt frame reclined against the worn seat, the faint scent of mine dust and sweat clinging to his shirt like a badge of endurance. His hand rested in hers, their rings intertwined, a simple silver bridge across the chasm of lost years, etched initials warm from shared skin. The convoy flanked them, bikes roaring in protective formation, engines a symphony of gravelly resolve that drowned out the wind's lonely howl. Jax rode point, his salt and pepper beard catching the light, a steadfast silhouette against the endless sagebrush, while Riley and Thomas brought up the rear, their presence a living testament to oaths that outlasted the storm. Willow Creek emerged like a reluctant confession from the heat mirage, its weathered buildings huddling under the midday glare, the air thick with the aroma of sun-dried earth and distant diner grease. Elena's pulse quickened as they turned onto Main Street, the familiar facades now shadowed by the revelations Marco had whispered during the drive. Tales of payoffs slipped under tables, construction bids twisted into veils for cartel cash, the sheriff's office a hollow shell propping up the rot. "He thought he had me silenced," Marco said softly, his voice gaining strength with each mile, hoarse edges smoothing like sanded wood. "But promises like ours? They echo louder than any lie." Elena squeezed his hand, the ring's cool metal grounding her amid the surge of righteous fury, a moral fire kindled by the chosen family who'd pulled her from isolation's edge. They pulled up to the sheriff's station, a squat brick building with peeling paint and a flag drooping in the still air, its windows reflecting the convoy like accusatory eyes. The guards from the mine, zip-tied and sullen in the bed of Thomas's truck, shifted uneasily, their silence a fragile dam against the flood of truth. Jax dismounted first, his boots hitting the pavement with a thud that reverberated through the quiet street, drawing stares from passers-by who paused mid-step, coffee cups forgotten in hand. Riley helped Luis out, the hauler's bandaged form a walking exhibit of the underbelly's cruelty, while Thomas scanned the lot with hawk-like vigilance, the faint jingle of his keys, a subtle rhythm of readiness. Elena supported Marco as they entered, the door's bell jangling like a clarion call, the interior cool and dim with the musty scent of old files and stale coffee. Sheriff Harlan, ironically sharing Jax's surname, though no blood tied them, looked up from his desk, his face paling beneath the fluorescent hum, badge glinting falsely on his chest. "Mrs. Ramirez," he started, voice oily with feigned surprise, but the words died as Marco stepped into the light, alive and unbowed, the chain's faint chafe marks on his wrists a silent indictment. The room thickened with tension, air heavy as the moral weight settled, corruption's facade cracking under the unyielding gaze of loyalty. "You buried this," Jack said, his gravelly tone steady as he slid a folder across the desk. Photos from the ravine, Luis's testimony scrawled in hasty notes, Marco's account of rigged accidents and shadow deals. No weapons drawn, no shouts, just the quiet power of evidence laid bare, like sunlight piercing a long-sealed crypt. The sheriff's eyes darted, sweat beading on his brow, the scent of fear sharp in the confined space. "This town's built on trust," Elena added, her voice firm, Marco's ring a steady pulse against her palm. "You traded it for envelopes, but we found him, not through your reports, but through promises that don't break." Marco nodded, his presence a living rebuke, the gaunt lines of his face speaking volumes of the endurance that had preserved his honor amid the dark. Harlan slumped, the fight leaching from him like air from a punctured tire, his confessions spilling in fragments, pressures from higher up, the cartel's grip tightening like vines on a crumbling wall. The guards outside corroborated in murmurs, their bravado evaporated under the convoy's watchful eyes. Jax radioed contacts beyond Willow Creek, honest feds untainted by the rot, ready to sweep in with warrants that would unravel the web. No vigilante justice here. The Iron Vows Code demanded exposure, the poetic triumph of truth over deceit, turning personal redemption into communal healing. As deputies, some unwitting, others complicit, were ushered in for questioning. The station buzzed with the hum of change, files pulled like weeds from overgrown soil. By late afternoon, with the sun dipping toward the mountains in a blaze of amber, Elena drove Marco home, the convoy escorting like iron guardians fading into the dust. Their modest house on the outskirts stood waiting, porchlight flickering on early against the lengthening shadows, the scent of neighborly casseroles wafting from the kitchen window. Sophia burst through the screen door at the sound of the truck, her 7-year-old frame a whirlwind of braids and wide eyes, freezing mid-step as recognition dawned. "Daddy?" she whispered, the word a fragile bridge across the void, her small hand reaching out as if testing a dream. Marco knelt, arms open, the reunion unfolding in the golden light, a tangle of hugs and tears, Sophia's laughter bubbling like a spring after drought, the silver ring on his finger catching her gaze with wonder. "I promised I'd come back," he said, voice thick, pulling Elena into the embrace, their family whole again, forged anew in the fire of trial. Jax lingered at the gate, his weathered face softening in the dusk, Riley and Thomas nodding from their bikes. "Family's what we choose," he called, engine rumbling to life. "Ride safe. The vow holds." They departed in a thunderous fade, leaving the Ramirez home bathed in twilight's gentle glow, the desert wind carrying whispers of sacrifice honored, honor as legacy. Elena watched from the porch as stars emerged, Marco's arm around her shoulders, Sophia chattering about school and drawings of far-off adventures. The ring on her finger no longer burned with loss, but glowed with fulfillment, a promise survived, redeemed through loyalty's quiet might. In Willow Creek, whispers of change rippled outward, arrests pending, the sheriff's chair empty, the cartel's tendrils severed by the light of unbreaking bonds. Redemption wasn't a solitary path, it was the road shared with chosen kin, where justice bloomed, not in violence, but in the enduring fire of word kept true. As night deepened, the horizon stretched infinite, a canvas for tomorrows rebuilt on foundations of honor, the echo of engines a distant lullaby of hope eternal. If this tale of unbreakable promises and chosen family has touched your heart, thank you for joining us on this ride. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of redemption and courage. Hit that button, and let's keep these northern confessions traveling far.